thought we would talk about identity evolution today. There was a good post from Alicia Hayburn, who's been in our course community for about a year and a half. And she was talking about in the post, and I'll read her post, but she was talking about how like changing your habits really change, how it really does change your identity and how that then changes your life. And she referenced this exercise that we have in identity evolution that we've taught for, I don't know when I started teaching that, maybe somewhere around 10 years ago, somewhere around there is my guess. And it's something that I find continually useful to return to. One of the things about joining us in Body Thrive is, you know, depending on when you come in, it's like we cycle through concepts and lessons. So while this might be repetitive to some of you, it'll be brand new to others, and it's always relevant. And to me, that's part of the fascinating part of perennial wisdom, is that it's always relevant to whatever's going on in your life right now. I have a few announcements. Let me just cruise through those real quick, and then we'll dive into identity evolution. And if you don't have a pad and a pen, I would recommend you taking this time to get that, and so that you can really dive into the identity evolution exercise. All right, Mexico dates. I have to announce we have a ton of, now we are officially post-COVID at Yogahealer and back to our usual shenanigans, which means meeting up in person to have massive breakthroughs. Okay, so January 27th to 29th, save the date. Minneapolis, I'm going back to Minnesota for my 25th college reunion. So we threw in a one afternoon workshop. I think it's almost full. It's August 7th. And then Jersey, we're going to the Jersey Shore in October 8th to 10th. So those are the big days. Okay, good. So Alicia posted this morning. I thought I'd read the post, and then I'll also read my comment, and then we'll do the identity evolution exercise together. Okay, so Alicia says, I've been in Body Thrive for about a year and a half. I think of the habits all the time. Some still challenge me, but I know the deep value of each of them. Yesterday, I felt the need to go back to the beginning and listen to Cate's recordings on identity evolution. It's a big damn deal to intentionally, thoughtfully, and strategically change yourself. I really worked hard on it last year and grew so much so fast that I left my family behind, and that was scary. So I shrunk again, returned to them, redefined contentment. But I was recently told that I am unhappy. I disputed this diagnosis, thinking about the privileges, all the privileges of my life. But because it was my father who made this proclamation, I decided to reconsider its truth. What if, despite my smiles and drive, goals and curiosity, meaningful job, appreciative family, paid mortgage, I am still unhappy? Cate's identity evolution exercise was really helpful. The 5 identities I am aiming for are living in abundance and giving generously, loving and being loved, accepting that everyone has a gift they're bringing in their own way to the world, strong body that takes me to exciting wild places, fulfilled, not searching. And so begins the journey again. All right, so that was Alicia's, and we'll go through this identity evolution exercise because I find it's always relevant. I mean, one of the things I find myself saying in friendly, when I'm talking with friends, close friends, is it's like, I'm in this massive transition. And I feel like I say that like all the time. And it's always true, this process of becoming. And yet there's also, there's phases that we're all in different aspects of our life, and life is increasingly complex. identities are increasingly complex, where you have a number of roles. The yogis call it dharmas, right? Where you have a dharma is a responsibility or something. That word, the root dha, da, it's the same root as, those of you in Living Ayurveda course, it's the same root as dhatu. And it means to hold or uphold. So a dhatu is a level of tissue, and it upholds the integrity of the tissue. So your blood is a tissue, and it has to uphold a duty to the body. It has to circulate. It has to circulate nutrition. It has to circulate oxygen. It has to remove carbon dioxide. So this idea of dharma and dhatu or dha, to uphold, you get to choose. I mean, this is such a unique time in history where we really get to choose our identity, unlike any other time before. I mean, down to the level of, some would argue, some down to the level of gender, right? There's so much freedom, and with that freedom, a lot of people just go to lowest common denominator, to being who their parents have told them they were, who other people have told them to be. But the opportunity is to decide for yourself who you want to be now and who you want to be next. And some of these decisions, some of the decisions are big, and it's going to take you time to become that. And there's going to be skills and tools and habits that need to be automated for you to really step into that identity. And the more aware you are of the phase that you're in and the next phase that you're going into, the more strategic you can be. And the more strategic you are, the more opportunities you create in your future. All right, so I talked last week about when you decide to do the hard thing first thing. So we talked about that on Body Thrive last week, about a friend of mine, an older guy who used to be one of my VIP clients 20 years ago. And he taught me, he was a successful business guy. And he's like, know what the hardest thing it is for you to do, and do it first thing. And so I trained myself to do that, more or less. And it's really paid off in spades. So again, if there's like habits, skills, tools that are part of a future identity, you want to be really aware of the one that's going to be hard. Maybe there's triggers, maybe it's undeveloped, maybe there's insecurity around it, maybe there's naivety around it, maybe there's just literally a lot to overcome to do that. But if you know what it is, and that's the hardest thing, and if you put the hardest thing first, then you build resilience. Then harder things become much easier things. And that's really, to me, one of the core components. It's a sneaky one with easeful living. Where easeful living really goes out the back door is when you kind of think you're doing the Zen thing by being present in the moment, but it's really a cop-out, where it looks like a procrastination, but it's really resistance. That's really avoidance. You guys know what I mean by that. Do I need to unpack that anymore, or is it like, yep, I kind of get that. I think I may have done that at some point. Okay, so my response was this, XOX. So Alicia and I've been part of this journey with her for 1.5 years, as I am with all of you. And she's in Master of You, and that's a pretty small group. So and she runs a nonprofit, and I really believe in their mission. And so we've been pretty connected through her process. So I say, XOX, Alicia, I'm going through a healing crisis, identity, evolution myself, getting close to 50. I'm learning to source power from the feminine, from flow. This is rearranging my fascia, nerves, womb, everything, surrendering, allowing, support. I'm the kind of person who, and we're going to get into the sentence stem. The sentence stem, I'm the kind of person who, is where you get to define who you are now. And this is a redefinition for most of us, like when we do this really well. So I say, I'm the kind of person who leans on the support of my people. So new for me. Happiness is found in the evolving self, at ease in the beingness of evolution. So that's my little warm up for us doing the identity evolution exercise together. I'm going to pull up a worksheet from my pad, and away we begin. So this exercise in part I pulled from, it's not coming up. This exercise I pulled from Jane McGonigal's Super Better. It's a book. She had a PhD in gaming and like video gaming. I know it's funny to think that people have PhDs in that, but they do. And you have to understand a lot about the theory behind gaming and how all that works. And she had a traumatic brain injury. I can't remember what happened. I think it was a severe concussion, and she like literally could not think at all. So she was on disability. Her career was out the window. But even more so than that, like she had migraines and was just like in a dark room most of the time, and in a pretty bad way. And what she found, and she knew a lot about gaming. She knew a lot about if you turn something into a game, you might play the game. And playing is different than work. So it can be a lot more fun. It can be a lot more fun to simply play than it can be to turn something into work or a project. And so what she did, let me see if I can plug this into a different outlet. So what she did was she created a superhero image of herself. And the idea was that you get to choose. You get to choose who you are next. And in the choosing of who you are next, you get to give yourself a cape, you get to give yourself a name, you get to give yourself an identity. So you're literally choosing your identity. You're choosing who you're becoming. And you're making it explicit, not implicit, not something that you're thinking about, not something that's subtle, but you're making yourself who you want to be next. I'm the kind of person who. So we need to do this. We need to come up with an identity. And I'll walk us through a few questions to help you center on who you are next. For some of you, it might be helpful to just close your eyes, and for others, it might be helpful to lay down on the floor, and for others to stand up. Like get in a position where you're receptive, where you're open, where you're not thinking about other things, but you're super curious about who you've been and how, this idea of duty or dharma or to uphold, how this has been, to some degree put on you by culture, by family, for some people from ancestral patterning. Some of us inherited an identity that we were encouraged to uphold. And again, that's that word dharma or dhatu, to uphold, to take on the responsibility. And some of the roles you've filled have expired, are simply complete, are done, are at or nearing closure, nearing a time in life where you can choose to bring that to a close and to move into your next identity. And there's not really an avoidance here. There's not like a jumping around or bypassing. It's very much a connecting to the past, realizing that who you've been in the past is leverageable. All the skills, all the tools, all the relationships, all that you've cultivated in yourself and developed in yourself is accessible to your future self. It's not going anywhere. And yet there might be certain roles, responsibilities, duties, and these are all etymology of the word dharma. There might be some duties, even some ways of being. And this for me is where it gets into the level of fascia. So fascia is the connective tissue, and there's a lot of interesting things about fascia, but like the fascia holds the neuroplasticity. So it holds the nervous system in a pattern And when we realize that the fascia itself is plastic, even though it can be hard like scar tissue, it can be closed off from the body like fibrosis, meaning it's not really an active circulation. It's a very rock. It can become like a rock-like substance in the body, and it can hold a pattern in place, and it can hold an emotional pattern, and it can hold that. It holds the identity. And this is really important to recognize, is it's like held in the neuromuscular body. The identity. So it's not just, this concept of like, it's in the mind or in the thinking mind. It's like, yes, and all the way through the connective tissue. So as you decide who you want to become next, you decide how this person will feel, how this person will think, how this person will be, how this person will do, how this person will connect, how this person will receive, give. And that's conscious, right? And as it's conscious, you start to see, well, like if I'm going to be that person, then I'll need to start to move in these ways, or be in these ways, or think in these ways, or connect with these kind of people. And I might need to steer away from that old pattern. Like I might need to put that old pattern, that old way of being, that old way of conducting my thinking, conducting my feeling, conducting my moving, conducting myself. I might need to bring that to closure. That which has served up till this point has done its job. That duty is now fulfilled. That tissue, in a way, if we bring it through Ayurvedic language, that dhatu is now mature, and so it can become something else. In Ayurveda, as dhatus mature, it's really cool. They become ojas. They become resilience. Isn't that fascinating? This old philosophy, such an old philosophy. And it's as dhatus mature, through having mature Agni, or mature ignition is the etymology of Agni, like true ignition in the tissue, which is ignited by consciousness permeating matter, you get insight and resilience. Pretty cool stuff. Like at the level of immunity, at the level of immune integrity, at the level of nervous system resilience, which the word they have for that is guru, right? At the level of density of consciousness and tissue. Okay, so that's my little warm up. Write down what's expiring. Just write down like what's coming to maturation, to closure, what patterns have served you, or maybe not even served you, but just been there, just been part of your modus operandi thus far, that are just feeling claustrophobic or outdated, or are starting to fall away by themselves, like a ripe fruit from a tree. Or even those that feel pathological, like where you're like, God, I keep doing this. And it's shaping my personality because I keep responding in this way. I keep doing this habit, even though, like, oh my gosh, that habit is doing me. Who's making the choice here? What is expiring? I usually notice that there's rounds or themes, kind of like when you sing it a round robin and you keep sort of repeating the chorus, like there's often reoccurring themes to what's expiring. Can also be like when you're digging for a root of a plant. Thistle's a good example, and like you think you got it, but then it's like, oh no, it keeps going. And now you're at that part of like being able to dig a little deeper, getting closer to the root. And so it seems what you're writing is redundant, that's natural. It's a spiral, and it'll hit on core themes in your life. Some of us, in terms of being, like, we could in many ways be giving up or releasing being controlling or being naive or being submissive or being aggressive, or like, you can look at how you're being, and again, we get to choose. And it's really the point of identity evolution as an exercise, is as you get to choose. I guess I don't need this on that screen anymore. So in terms of the ways of being that are expiring for you, what is that? Like, one of the ways that I notice it myself is, like, I can be disappointed. Like, I can really be disappointed in other people really easily. It's such a natural go-to emotion. It's like, hold like insanely high standards for other people, and then just get to be chronically disappointed when people don't live up to my standards for them. Right? Like, what if that's expiring? What does that then open up? So try to find the ones for you that you're like, oh, that's a deep, you want to hit depth right now with this. Like, you want to get to the core of realize. Some of you are frustrated, so you are being in frustration, or being depressed, or being anxious. Like, some of you are just over being anxious and curious of, like, what would it be like to not be anxious? There's a lot with time. How do you want to be in time? So a lot of people are being in a rush. Other people are being worried. Or being triggered. It's kind of a popular new agey one. Get so triggered. I'm choosing to be triggered. So and I'd like to see in the chat, if you can just put it in, I believe in potency, so it's like 1 or 2 words. What is the being pattern that's expiring? So these are really good. Overwhelmed, being controlling, being not trusting. What's not trusting? Because I don't want to put it in the negative. It's sometimes hard it's like, what's not enough? And then the positive, it's like unworthy, inadequate, being perfectionist, being overwhelmed, being negative. Yeah. That's a good one. Like, oh, wow, I'm oriented towards the negative, oriented towards the not enough, being impatient, being passive. What's the one for trust? It's something to do with unsupported, I think, with trust. It can also, for some people, can have to do with like a lack of faith or order. So there's like chaos. When you really get to not trusting life, like, to me, it goes towards like chaos. Like, that life is chaotic, so I can be in the chaos. Yeah, the not enough time, like being rushed, like feeling out of sync, being asynchronistic. You guys are doing good work here. I know it's sort of a slow and deep process, but it works every time you do it. That's why we tend to do this a couple times a year here. Being random. Yeah, being critical. Oh, I hear you, Sylvia. Yeah, this being responsible for things that are not my responsibility, that's like an overstepping boundaries, isn't it? It's like not allowing other people to have their own journey. Yeah, being rushed, being inconsistent. There's this being, I think, Carolyn, this not wasting energy on needing to be right or wasting energy on things that don't give you joy. It's like not needing to change. It's this allowing. It can go to controlling too, like not needing to be controlling. A controlling of the outcome. The only reason I know this one inside out is it's on my list. It's on my list too. What we'll find with the spirals is there's levels of subtlety where it's like, oh yeah, that's right. This is a reoccurring theme in my life, and I'm 20,000 times better than I was at it. But like, there's that root of the thistle that you got to keep digging and digging to get a little lower and to really free the root of the soil. Yeah, this needing perfection before resting is a really big one. Needing things to be in a done or completion state when life really might be a lot messier than that, to be in being, to be in flow. Okay, so now what's the opposite? So this is kind of the easy part. You did the hard part, which is like, okay, that's on the way out. So what is that? What's the opposite? And this is where polarity therapy is super effective. Like increases like and opposites reduce each other is the basis of polarity therapy. So what's the opposite? What's the antidote? What's the next decision to say, well, I will be this way. I'm the kind of person who is like this. And this is, again, we need to change at the level of fascia, at the level of connective tissue. So this is somatic, meaning as you're writing your words or thinking your words of who am I choosing to be next? How am I choosing to be? At the core of being, it's like, feel like, what does that mean? Because it's a new operating system. It's a new operating system at the level of the nervous system. So in our Ayurvedic language, we'd say it's simultaneous in all 5 koshas. It's like all permeating. And then the neuromusculature follows the subtle impulse. Allowing the body to embody the new way of being. This is a very slow process because the nervous system is patterned. So there's a neural map for the old way, and it's a reflex. Then the fascia, or the connective tissue, holds the neural pattern in that old reflex. So you got to really like inhale, exhale, like, oh, how am I going to not be controlling? How am I going to be allowing? Like, what does that even feel like? Like, what does that feel like? What does it feel like to not need to be a perfectionist, but to like, what is the opposite of that? What is it like to be in the flow of time, or the flow of rhythm, or synchronicity? Because when we're in a rush, this is the crazy thing. I was listening to Carl Jung's essay on synchronicity. I'm more or less, you guys know, I like get obsessed with certain people in certain phases and just kind of download their brains into my brain. So I'm doing that with Carl Jung right now. I've been doing that for about a month. It's been lovely and amazing and complex. So this idea of, if you're in a rush, you miss synchronicity. But what's interesting in his thinking on synchronicity is there's a connection to source that's orchestrating coincidence. So Deepak Chopra calls it synchrodestiny because he's really tapped into that, of the like who you run into when, of like what happens when. Like Ushi, remember in Lisbon when like you and I sat down and we had, like everyone else was in a threesome and we were in a twosome, and we had like 20 minutes to do, and like we had more time than we needed, and a lot happened in like 10 minutes. And it was like, okay, this is happening now. So there's a level with synchronicity and synchrodestiny. So for anyone who's like, I'm in overwhelm, I'm in a rush, there's something that can't happen because of that mode of being. Does that make sense? And the same thing's true with perfectionism. Because if we're in a perfectionism and it's in our neuromusculature, that means there's this whole other level of creativity that's not permitted. I was with my niece and nephew and I was asking them about their goals, and we were on a road trip. You know how on a road trip you can kind of think big picture, especially on a road trip in Montana where it's like big sky country and there's not very many cars on the road, and it's big sky, big picture. And I was trying to help them get out of their box a little bit. And it was interesting that this boy, he's 13 and he already has perfectionism and fixed mindset, very, very hyper developed. And so getting outside the box was really hard. It was really hard to get into when you let go of needing to figure it all out or do it all right the first time. What can then happen? That playfulness that then happens. So again, in the identity evolution, what you want to start to see is like, what are some of the possibilities that open up from the new way of being? And write that down. Like, what are some insights that you can notice right now from the new way of being? Just deciding to be that now. For some of us, like with the controlling part, like there's an availability, a presence. It's so cool how freeing not needing to control something is, isn't it? Like, because then you can just wonder what's going to happen. Like, you don't have to actually do anything. So there's a lot of energy that's freed up. Even the feeling of like rushing or not being in sync with your own life, what happens when you give that up? Say like, okay, that was an interesting 50 years of that pattern, or however many. Like, what's it like to not have to do that, to not feel pressured by time? For some of us, this negative, it can really go against the self. So this is where we don't like ourselves. And we can project that, we can separate parts of the self because we're so cognitively complex as human beings, and we can decide to not like our body. I joke about this with like dogs. Like, have you ever seen a dog that like didn't like their body? I did see an obese dog lately who had an obese owner, and it was kind of sad, but that dog was still very comfortable in their body. Like, it seemed like, so it's clearly a human trait to be able to dislike the self. So some of us dislike parts of our selves, our personalities, or body parts, or maybe we're just at war with like the aging process on a subtle level. Like, we'd never admit it, but like on a subtle level, that there's a separate self sense, a sense of being separate from self, rather than fully in dog state, in like dog incorporation of like, I'm here now, this is me. Some of us are unsatisfied. So the question then is like, what is it like to be satisfied? Like deeply satisfied. Instead of seeing the imperfection, we see the perfection in the mess, in the chaos, in the entropy and enthalpy. All right. So then the question is somewhat along the lines of what habits, and for many of you, this is really subtle, like where we're going today with this is more on the subtle plane. Like what habits, we know now what ways of being this next identity, this you, this current and present you, future you has. So what habits reinforce or create the structure for this identity evolution? Because remember how I said like that old operating system's a reflex. It's so built in that the present self will just slip back into that old neuromuscular pattern when you're not looking, when you're not paying attention. It'll get triggered on when you're with certain people in certain situations, doing certain things. So what are the habits that are like your insurance policy for this identity evolution, for this next way of being? What are the habits? And what are the habit triggers? Like what are the triggers that trigger those habits? So a habit trigger can be a time, a place, another person, a preceding action, or an emotion. What do you need to believe to be this way? So an example with control, like it's like this higher level belief. What's the higher level belief for anyone who has an expiring pattern of the need to control? There's controlling others. Need to control self could be the perfectionism one. What would you need to believe for those of you who feel inadequate or not enough? When you write down the belief, like, so somatic means, to me, somatic is like a visceral listening. So it's saying that your organs are intelligent, your levels of tissue are intelligent. And so when you feel it at belief, like see if you can feel it in the tissue, like feel your viscera. Like for some of us that are controlling, like there's this need to solve other people's problems or solve the world's problems. And so it's like, who would you be without that belief? What if you could just allow the shit show to unfold? Right? I mean, that's what it can seem like. That's what it can seem like. I don't have to save the world. I don't have to save my family. I don't have to save my marriage. I don't have to save my child. I don't have to. I mean, this is the curious thing about Dharma and responsibility is you get to choose how you respond. And you choose how you respond by choosing how you are. And so what's happening at the level of belief? So there's gotta be, do you guys agree that if some pattern's expiring, there's a belief that's expiring along with it? So what is the belief that's expiring? And then what's the higher truth that's emerging? Because it is a spiral, it's an evolutionary spiral. So it goes somewhere. It transcends and includes. Keep going back to your list of what's expiring. Find the beliefs. was really interesting in Jane McGonigal's healing herself using this. And the way that she broke it down was like, what are the power-ups and what are the bad guys? So like in Pac-Man, I know I'm dating myself, born in 1973, popular video games. By the time I was 10 was Pac-Man, later emerged Miss Pac-Man. Pac-Man's a pretty simple video game. There's like little pellets on the screen and there's a mouth and it's trying to eat the pellets and it gets points. And then there's these ghosts that come and chase it. And if the ghosts are the bad guys. And if the ghosts get the Pac-Man, it dies. Now, there's power-ups. There's these like little things on the screen that if the Pac-Man gets to eat the power-up, guess what it can then do? Eat the ghosts. I know, it's a really complex video game. So now it has like the superpower to be able to eat its own demons. This is very Ayurvedic at its core, because like Ayurveda believes in the power of digesting that which is toxic, that which is not self, that which is pathogen or virus, or that which is not incorporated, and does it through heating that up, through igniting consciousness into matter, and it digests it. So the thing that you're eating goes into autophagy. It's really pretty cool. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're making an unconscious or subconscious pattern conscious. So you have a power up and you get to eat or digest the bad guys, like the old, in this case, it's like the old belief. So if you make a list, and I'll go back to my pad, but you can make a little list. So you have your superhero on the top of the paper, you've got your power ups and you got your bad guys. You can do this at the level of belief. So what are some of the bad guy beliefs? And that's just simply saying, these are the ghosts of your past. These are the beliefs that like, yeah, they served something at some time for someone, and maybe that was you, but no longer. But no longer. And then what are the power-up beliefs? And if you're like, I actually need to, and to believe something, I love this, to believe it is to act it out. That's something, I don't know where that comes from, because a lot of things I think came from Jordan Peterson, came from people like Carl Jung or Nietzsche or other past psychoanalysts or philosophers. But a belief is to act it out. So then it goes to, okay, if this is the power of belief, how do I act it out? If this is the bad guy belief, how do I act that out? Why? So you can catch yourself in the act. So it might be something as subtle as like, I make this suggestion when I'm with this person, and that's a bad guy. Like that alone is a bad guy. Or I pack my schedule with not enough transition time to be in flow. So now that's a bad guy. Whereas the power up is like, I allow transition time. Why? Because I have a belief that synchronicity matters. I have a belief that I want to be available for synchronicity. Yeah, so the belief that I am unsupported, I am unworthy, the world is unsafe. And you can see that, like, okay, how would that affect the neuromuscular body? Like, what would the pattern be in the nervous system? That's then going to control the fascia. That pattern, interesting, like in yoga therapeutics, I've seen that pattern go two ways. One way is hypermobility, for those who are therapists out there. So you literally are acting out instability because the body's unstable. For those of you who teach yoga, and like these people, like you can't get them into a handstand because they're like a jellyfish. They're super, super flexible, but they can't create a structure of stability within their own tissue. Like people whose like joints fall out. I never knew this happened to people, but I had a client really, really early on, and her mom had it really bad, where their mom literally couldn't walk without a hip dislocating. It's like hyper elasticity in the joints. It's very, like the world's very, everything's unstable. Even the ground's unstable at that point. You can also have the hyper contracted pattern, which is like everything's so unsafe that you just pull, you literally like pull in Ayurveda, you like pull Apanavayu up, and that's the downward flow of energy. It allows for bowel movements. It allows for menses. It allows for fertility. It allows for babies to be born. It's this deep energy in the lower chakras that has a descending. It's the inhalation. We really allow the belly and the root chakra to move downward upon filling up. And that can get reversed with the pattern of like, I'm not enough. The world's unsafe. I need to control everything. You pull the control from the root second chakra up to the brain. And it creates a deep tension in the pelvic floor muscles. In men, it creates prostate issues. In women, it can create endometriosis and all sorts of cancers in the cervical area. It can create all these issues in the colon, constipation. It can create bladder issues, urination. And it's like there's a neuromuscular pressure. It's from the nervous system saying like, I am unsafe, so I'm going to contract towards the heart and contract inwards towards the self. Okay, so all that's to say is like, what, if you're going to act out your higher level beliefs, like what are some of, like what's the yoga for that? What's the movement pattern for that? What's habit at the level of movement? I practice walking a lot. I really do. Like I take walking very seriously, much more so than the average person, because I'm acting it out in my neuromuscular system. I'm acting the belief out. It just looks like I'm taking a walk to my neighbors, but there's a lot going on the inside, right? There's a lot going on. And I can really only do it for like, I mean, if I'm honest, like 30 seconds at a time. You know, like my mind's really not that strong, but I can keep coming back to it like 10 times in a walk, and then it grows and it grows. And so soon it's like, oh no, I'm more open, I'm more available, I'm more receptive, I'm more rooted. I'm not pulling up Apanavayu when I'm walking, I'm extending out. My psoas is in the back body, right? And so it can really go places. So those with a negativity pattern, and it's like, okay, so if I believe life is good, if that's the opposite of the negative pattern, it's like life is good. Everything's actually like, there's a beautiful teaching in Tantra. There's a few beautiful teachings. One is it's all Shiva, like it's all divine. It's all divine. Even the tragedies part of the play. Like Shakespeare had to write tragedies as well as comedies, as well as parodies, right? It's all in there. So the other is see the Shri. They're teaching from Tantra. So anyone who's like in the negativity pattern or in the like, no, not, like I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, right? And if that's the pattern that's releasing, the higher belief is like, I'm impressed by everything. Like I see the beauty in the tragedy. Like I see the Shri. Like for instance, so we were in Butte, Montana this past weekend at the International Folk Music Festival that happens in Butte, Montana. It's a free festival that the State Art Council puts on. It's really one of the coolest experiences. I've been many times. They bring in bands from all over the world that are representing traditions of various cultures and countries, but are very modern and hip to the swing. A lot of dancing, a lot of cross-pollination of these bands as well, because they let the bands cross-pollinate and form their own performances together and educate the audience. And this whole thing's happening. It's beautiful. And we've decided to invest in Butte, Montana in the last couple of years. And so we have a building uptown that needs it's a remodel. So we're sleeping in there's a restaurant on the basement floor. It's really kind of a cool restaurant. So we decided to camp out in the restaurant because we don't have a place to sleep there, but we wanted to be in town. And the next morning there's like glass on the street, because the city is partying. And Montana's a very liberal state. And people really, it's like very much a blue collar working town, very much a drinking kind of a town. So there's glass in the street. And so I'm cleaning up the glass, I'm sweeping up the glass. And seeing the Shri of that is like, people had fun here last night, right? And I have a broom and a dustpan, and it's not a big deal. Like, it's really cool that people had fun here last night. So that's an example of like, how do you act it out? Well, sometimes it's at the level of how you're doing what you're doing, because you could be really frustrated cleaning up someone else's broken glass, right? Really disappointed. And so then my mom tells me this story because she was in, what's that town in Norway? It begins with like Rijiki something. It keeps going. It's got a lot of letters. One of my Euro members will know. And I guess it's like a big thing there that you drink with glasses in the street and everyone throws their glass in the street at the end of the night, and then the street cleaners come in the morning. And it's just like part of the culture. It's not like this thing to be all bent out of shape about. It's just part of it. So that's part of, you know, for anyone programmed to negativity, when you're like, well, how am I going to act it out? What changes at my level of habit? What changes at my level of behavior to see the Shri, to see the divine? Because the nervous system can be so programmed to be disappointed and to be negative, and world's going to hell in a handbag. I can't even pronounce that, Carol. Reykjavik? Reykjavik? I don't know. I'm gonna try to squeeze Norway into my Euro tour next year. All right. So I'm just gonna go back to my pad for a hot minute. And this is what essentially you want to end up with, is something that's like, let me just get to a blank screen here. At this point, you should be able to give yourself a name. Here's your title. Now, the title should be in the positive, if you can. So you're a hero, and so you have a name or a title, and make it grandiose. So go to the hyperbole, is the teaching in superheroes, is you go to the hyperbole. You go to the opposite extreme. So if opposites reduce each other, you go to the opposite extreme. And then you've got your bad guys. And these are ways that you can identify your own outdated behaviors, because they will pop up. They will get triggered. Just because we're doing this exercise doesn't mean they're going to be gone forever, that pattern's expiring, because it's in the neuromusculature. So it's going to be the default until you override. And the way you override with neuroplasticity is with repetition. Abhyasa is the word in yoga. Abhyasa. And what's interesting about the teaching in the Yoga Sutras about abhyasa, or about the practice or the new pattern, is that you can't have attachment to how long it takes. So practice is coupled with vairagyam, which means like, well, raga is desire, right? Where you're just like, and you can get caught up in the world of petty desires. So the vibe part of vairagyam is like, not that, not desiring. So you have to not desire the future identity while you're doing everything you can to override the past identity, and writing over it with a much more intelligent neurofascial or neuromuscular response at the level of fascia. So you have your title. If you want a cape, if you want headgear, if you want, and this is what the Vedic tradition does really well, is like, you can have as many arms as you want with as many tools as you want, right? You can have weaponry, you can accessorize. What are you carrying? What are you deciding to be a card-carrying member of? You get to decide. You can have on hand your power-ups. What do you need to schedule in? With habits, you can even go to like eat, drink, how you need to move. There's another level to this, and you might need another piece of paper. But it's something that I keep discovering in the spiral evolution sort of way, which like at this other level is, it's really like, who are the people that already know the power-ups. And what are the people, who are the people that are really trapped in the bad guys? And the reason this is helpful to identify is then you know where to go for support, and you also know where you'll get triggered into the old pattern. And by knowing that, you simply have more ability to affect how quickly you evolve into this next identity. All right, good. Peace out.